but more so recommending you what not to read. If you are looking for something that involves critical thinking, please do not pick up this book. Ghosts, witches, werewolves, vampires. This series very nearly killed me. It was so bad. Purely just for vibes. Hey friends, welcome back. Time for another monthly reading wrap up. This month was definitely an interesting one, so it should be a pretty wild ride. Before we hop in, make sure to like, subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, and let's hop in. I generally like to start my wrap-ups with some stats. So for October, we read 10 books in total. Pretty much all of them were supernatural related. Ghosts, witches, werewolves, vampires. I feel like I read it all this month and it was the only thing I read. So for our genre breakdowns, we have 5 fantasy and 5 romances. But just know almost all of these are like paranormal fantasy romances. Generally, I pride myself on my ability to read my TBR. But not so much this month. We only read 4 out of the 8 books I said on my TBR. My average rating went into the gutter. I was so burnt out on these books this month, so we only have a 3.15 average rating. I fear this monthly wrap up isn't so much going to be me recommending books for you to read, but more so recommending you what not to read. We had some chunky books this month, so in total for our pages read, it was 4,788 pages. Also, one thing I wanted to shout out, I recently downloaded the Fable app, which is basically just the more updated and user-friendly version of Goodreads. But at the end of this month, they gave me this cute little graphic of my reading wrap-up that I just wanted to include here because it's so freaking cute. I can't wait to generate these every month, and I feel like it's something that I'm gonna add to my wrap-ups just because it's nice to have a visual sometimes. I've been linking my Goodreads down below, but I'm also gonna start linking my Fable account. Fable is so fun because it lets you do quarter and half-star ratings, which obviously we all know Goodreads doesn't allow. So yeah, follow me on Goodreads, follow me on Fable. Let's chat, let's connect, and now let's hop on into the books I read this month. Kicked off spooky season in October with a cute little witchy rom-com. I read The xhex by Erin Sterling. I feel like the whole premise of this book is so silly and I kind of love it. Our female main character, Vivi, hexed her ex Reese 9 years ago after he dumped her. She kind of never thought anything of it, but Reese has to end up coming back into town, and as soon as he crosses the town border, things just start going awry for him, and these two are quickly forced together and realize that the hex is alive and well and they need to work together to fix it. The absolute best time to read this is in the fall time. I really don't think this is a must read in any other time of year, but if next fall you're like, hey, I need a cute little witchy read, would definitely recommend The xhex. It was a bit spicier than I thought it was going to be, but not in a bad way. So for a witchy, spicy rom-com, I would say go ahead and add this to your list for next fall time. Continuing on our witchy reads, I read the 5th book in the All Souls trilogy called the Blackbird Oracle. With this being the 5th book, I really can't tell you too much about the plot that happens within this one, so I'm going to tell you about the first book in the series, A Discovery of Witches. We follow a witch, Diana, who stumbles across this book called the Book of Life, and it holds a lot of the secrets and origin stories for the 3 different creatures within the world: witches, vampires, and demons. It is a book that has been hidden away for millennia, essentially. And when Diana finds it, she also ends up getting connected to a vampire, Matthew de Claremont. The different species within this world are not meant to commingle, so them being a witch and a vampire and building a relationship together is not acceptable or tolerable in their world at all, and it starts to ruffle a lot of feathers and things quickly go awry in their love story. So throughout the series, not only do we follow Diana learning more about her magic and ever increasing her power, but also we watch them trying to rebuild the relationships between different species and to allow this to be a more cohesive world. Originally, I think the series was just supposed to be a trilogy. There is a corresponding TV show called A Discovery of Witches, which follows the first 3 books. Absolutely loved the TV show. I feel like it was so well done and it is very accurate to the books. Book 4 I read earlier this year, and I'm really not sure what the whole point of that book was. We got a lot more backstory on a side character that I just just overall don't feel like was necessary. Book 5, I'm really surprised why this book was written. I really think this is just for the super fans of the series. And originally when I saw that book 5 was being released, I thought this was going to be the 5th and final book, but no. This leaves off and that there's going to be more books in the series, which is a bit shocking to me. I gave this book a 3 stars. It was fine. It's really not a standout. Again, I really just think this is for the super fans. We watch Diana continue to build her power, and we get introduced to a side of her family that we haven't seen yet. And one thing that really stuck out is Diana and Matthew's character traits felt so different than the first 3 and 4 books. I really didn't enjoy Diana nearly as much in this book. Her personality was quite dislikable at times. I don't know if I'm going to read book 6. It seems like Deborah Harkness releases books in the series every 2, 3, or 4 years, so I probably have plenty of time to think about it until book 6 comes out. But I feel like after book 1 and 2, how much I cared about this series really just took a nosedive, and I don't know if the entire series really is a must read. Oh boy, this next book. I don't want to talk about this one for too long because I did do a whole reading vlog and I ranted about this one multiple times. I read Phoenix Flame by Sara Holland. I gave it a 1 star. It was so bad. This is book 2 in the Havenfall series. Havenfall follows a 17-year-old girl named Maddie, whose family has a lineage of being the innkeepers at this inn called Havenfall, and it's essentially Switzerland between these different magical realms. Once a year, delegates of all the realms meet to make peace treaties, negotiations, and Maddie goes up to Havenfall for the summer, but this summer is a little bit different. The current innkeeper is her uncle, and her uncle, through mysterious circumstances, is unable to run the inn. So through the blood lineage, Maddie is the interim innkeeper, and we get introduced to quite a couple different problems and secrets that are revealed that are happening within Havenfall that Maddie has to attempt to remedy, even though she doesn't have her uncle's assistance or guidance throughout the journey. What's really difficult with a 17-year-old main character is that there's just so much immaturity, absolutely no common sense going on within these 2 stories. Not only do we have this extremely dislikable main character, but I'm also very confused on why the choice was made to separate Havenfall and Phoenix Flame into 2 books, because Havenfall we get introduced to multiple issues. I would say about like 2 out of the 3 issues are solved within Havenfall, and then Phoenix Flame takes place just a few weeks after Havenfall, and we're kind of solving the last remaining issue within it. Since there's hardly any time in between the books, it just feels like such an odd choice that we chose to separate these out in 2 books. It didn't feel like we had enough plot to fill up 2 books worth. Additionally, there are multiple plot points within the story that are just completely unresolved, and it just, I don't know. I don't know what the editors were doing within this series. I don't know if they just felt like giving up, but this was just an absolute mess. And I feel like there were so many areas of improvement that could have happened within the plot, within the characters, within the writing style, that I was just left with overwhelming feelings of frustrations at the end of this book. And I should have DNF'd it 100%. I forced myself through it because I was filming it, but in all honesty, this should have been a DNF. Another book that I have so many thoughts and feelings on is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This was the highest rated book on my Goodreads TBR list. It has like over 2 million ratings and it is rated absurdly high. For me, I really feel like this book is overhyped. I landed on a 3.75. Oh my gosh, I struggled to connect to our female main character so severely within this one. We follow Violet, who's starting her training at the Basgiath War College. And originally, Violet's life, she was always planning on going to the scribe quadrant, which is kind of like the writers or the historians. But there's 4 different quadrants that you can choose, and her mother, who's a military commander, forces her to join the dragon riders quadrant, which is known to be the most brutal, the most deadly, the most dangerous. And Violet only has like 6 months to prepare. And she was never expecting on going into the Dragon Riders quadrant because she has some type of condition where her bones are very brittle. She's always thought of herself, and others have thought of herself, as weak and fragile. And that is just none of the traits that you want to take into the Dragon Rider Squadron. But alas, she's forced into it. And to add to the ever-present danger, she also ends up being under the wing leader, Xaden Ryerson, who from the get-go is just deemed as her #1 biggest threat and enemy, because Violet's mom killed Xaden's dad in the war, because Xaden's dad was deemed to be a traitor. But why I felt like I really couldn't connect to Violet is, like I mentioned, the first few hundreds of pages. I mean, we're just perpetually being reminded of why Violet is so weak and frail and brittle, and why she would never survive. However, as always in fantasy books, she has the chosen one complex, and just the series of the most unrealistic events takes place afterwards. I get it, this is a fantasy book, there's dragons involved. I get this isn't totally going to be realistic, but I'm talking about why the most small and frail girl would have this happen, is where the characterization just felt like it absolutely didn't make sense. There were so many moments in the book where our characters just completely contradicted themselves. I honestly felt like Rebecca Yarros didn't have a strong sense of who the characters were in her mind. So therefore, we just wrote them however we wanted to in each scene, just because it's more convenient to the plot. And I'm like, we did no work to get from A to B, so therefore I don't believe anything that you're saying. Additionally, this book is so long. It is like 650 pages. The audiobook is like 22 hours long. And unfortunately, we are in Violet's head for the whole time. What I would give for this book to have been dual POV. The second half of this story plot-wise really took off. There was so much happening. We had a huge fight and battle sequence at the end, which was really impactful to the story, and is really why I raised my rating up a little bit more, because honestly the first half of the story is like a 3 stars maybe, but the second half of the story things really take off. What makes me very nervous is that the second book in this series, Iron Flame, is even longer, and I've heard that everyone has said that it's so disappointing, and that's coming from people who rated Fourth Wing 5 stars. I'm really debating whether it's going to be worth reading such a long book when I really kind of only moderately liked the first one. Something that I want to add to my list of life accomplishments is I read the entire Twilight saga this month. This series very nearly killed me. Again, if you want super in-depth thoughts, I vlogged the whole thing, and it's so funny watching that video back because at Twilight I was so hopeful, but oh my gosh, do things go downhill. I feel like I don't even need to really give you a synopsis of this book, right? I feel like everyone knows Twilight. We follow a teenage romance between Bella and Edward. Edward is a vampire, and we just follow quite the series of events that occurs between these two. Overall, my main synopsis for this whole series is that the movies are so much better than the books. I gave Twilight a 4 stars purely just for vibes, because I think they stuck so closely to the books whenever it came to the movies. So really, honestly, this doesn't even feel like a book. This feels like a script, and you can just see the movie scenes playing out in your head, and it's a really quick and easy read to get through because of that. New Moon is where I was severely questioning my life decisions. Bella's codependency issues within this book are just so apparent. It is so unhealthy and toxic to watch. Jacob is so unhealthy and toxic within these books, extremely manipulative, and I overall found him so much more dislikable in the books versus the movies. So this book, just really being in Bella's head with Jacob, was like my worst nightmare. Gave this a 2 stars, and I never want to reread this ever again. Eclipse for me was just a 3 stars because it's very forgettable. I don't feel like it's necessary to the plot at all. Really, where our characters start and end within this book is the same place, and I just feel like it's way too long for that to be the case. Almost nothing really happens in this book, in my opinion. Breaking Dawn is realistically the best book I think that is within the series. I gave this a 4 stars, even though she is chunky. There's a lot that happens within this book, a lot of character development, new characters introduced, different plot lines taking place, and overall I would just say it's a bit more complex. Because what I find the most frustrating within these books is being stuck in Bella's head, I am curious about reading Midnight Sun because I think that takes place all within Edward's POV. I feel like that would be interesting. So if we have any Twilight girlies out there who feel similar to me whenever it comes to the books, let me know. Do you think Midnight Sun would be worth my time? I don't think it's anything that I'd be reading right away. I'd maybe leave that until next fall. I'm curious if it would be worth it because again, I think it's a pretty dang long book and I just really don't want to be wasting my time with subpar reads, especially when they're that long. The next book I read is such a mouthful, so let me read this out. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Oh my gosh, what a long title, but I would actually have to say that this is the best book that I read all month. This was a 4.25 stars. We follow our female main character, Mika Moon, who is a witch that is currently living in England. While this book kind of takes place in present day, the culture surrounding the society does not allow witches to congregate. Basically, like every witch that is born ends up being orphaned, and it's very frowned upon to have groups of witches together. And Mika really does not like that. Growing up being an orphan, moving around a lot, she really yearns for that sense of community, which she feels like she's never had her entire life. So she's made herself a little online presence where she posts witchy videos pretending to be a witch. But this catches the eye of some caretakers who are the adoptive parents of 3 little witches. They contact Mika for help because these caretakers are not witches themselves. They're really needing someone to tutor and teach the girls more about their powers and learn how to control their magic. So the found family that takes place within this book is just such a standout for me. It is so heartwarming to learn more about these 3 little girls, see how much these different caretakers love and want to support them even though they're not witches themselves, to see how Mika grows connections to these 3 girls as well as one of the caretakers in particular. We get a little grumpy sunshine romance that happens between them, which I felt like was very well timed, and I feel like it didn't take away anything from the story, and focusing on these young girls, it only added to it. But yeah, I feel like the minor characters that exist within this story are really just such a standout and add either so much comedic relief or emotional depth. And I read this mostly as an audiobook, and I also felt like the audiobook narrator was phenomenal. Last book of October, which I actually just finished this morning, is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. This book is honestly just a silly, goofy time. You have to suspend your disbelief so much throughout the story. If you are looking for something that involves critical thinking, please do not pick up this book. Our 2 main characters within this book is our female Cassie, who is just really down on her luck. She's about to get evicted from her current apartment, and she finds this ad on Craigslist for a room to rent for only like $200. Even though she's worried that her new roommate's going to be an axe murderer, she's kind of too desperate and has to accept the situation regardless. Cue our male main character, Frederick. He is like a 300-year-old vampire who has been asleep for quite a while, and he's needing someone to reintroduce him to modern society because he knows nothing that's happened within the past century. So his bright idea is, what better way to learn about modern society than someone who lives and embodies modern society. So she moves in and we follow these 2 from there. I feel like this plot was so just silly, and so I feel like there was so much opportunity at the start of this book to make this just a really funny, silly time. And at first I feel like the author really played into just how goofy this story is. This book is not meant to change your life. It's meant to be a rom-com. It's meant to be funny, and I feel like she did a really good job at the beginning of playing into that. Now once the romance started getting introduced is where things really started going downhill for me, and I feel like she just copied a bunch of standard lines that we see in romance novels, and it just felt like an amalgamation of popular romance tropes rather than a unique story. So in all honesty, I think this book would have been so much better for me if the romance was just cut out entirely, or if the pacing was just so much more slow burn than it actually was. But I mean, this book is easy reading. I wouldn't say it's the first book I would recommend to you for next fall, but if you love vampires and are just wanting a silly rom-com, maybe add this to the list. Maybe get it like from your library or something. I don't know if I'd spend money on this, but that was My Roommate is a Vampire. That is yet another month wrapped up. Not my favorite month I've ever had, but I have high hopes for November. I have some books on my TBR that I think will be really good. But let me know in the comments down below, how was your October reading? Did you read anything good? Is there anything you'd recommend to me? And if October wasn't a great reading month for you either, what do you have lined up for November? If you made it to this point, just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys.